So, the objective is pretty straightforward, kind of creating a regulatory framework for licensing and supervision of service providers. Who's a capital market service provider? By definition from the proclamation, any entity who's actually providing capital market related services in Ethiopia would be regulated. There are 3 exceptions, you can see them here. Lawyers, public accountants, obviously licensed by bodies here already, and publishers of capital market information, newspapers, magazines will not be licensed. But obviously, lawyers and accountants are big parts of the capital market. We will have separate kind of discussions on those. What do they do? What does it mean in our particular market? Just, what do we mean? Maybe take a second to talk about intermediaries. So intermediaries, basically, I think Dr. Talaun talked about the market, the exchange. Hanna talked about, the regulator. So the regulator is here, the market is here, and then we have investors. And the other arm, the other leg for the chair is the service providers. These are the people who come between the market and the investor. So a broker would be the connector of the market and the investor. The investment advisor, the investment bank would be the intermediary between the issuer, helping them design the market, what they're trying to offer, what they're trying to issue, and the company, right? The company and the market, who comes between the investment advisor, the investment bank, right? Okay, so what we try to do in our directives is we kind of use this approach for line approach. So we started from the proclamation. The proclamation outlines what a service provider is, how we are supposed to regulate it. Secondly, we kind of used, as Hanna already indicated, IOSCO principles. These kind of set up a list of kind of go-tos on how to regulate service providers. We use that. We benchmarked 6 jurisdictions. The idea was to make sure that is when we bring it, we're not experimenting. We're not, we're coming to the market late. The advantage of that is we know what works, what doesn't work in the world of regulating service providers. So what we're trying to do with our directives is align our provisions to kind of what's working on the ground today and what has failed and what hasn't failed. So for that, we're trying to align with jurisdictions that are similar to us. So we picked 3 jurisdictions in Africa, 3 jurisdictions in Asia, trying to align with what we are expecting in terms of products. And then obviously, this is, service providers. This is gonna be an Ethiopian service provider market. It's obviously open to international service providers who wanna come into the market, but the idea is, in our understanding and our wants are to make sure that we have a vibrant Ethiopian-based service provider industry. So that's the idea, and that is what we're trying to do. Okay, so I'll take just a minute on this. This is kind of what the licensing supervision directive will serve. Number 1, they'll provide kind of the big framework. This is how we're regulating service providers. Number 2, they outline kind of what we consider service providers to be. What are the licensed service providers? So the proclamation identified 8. In our directive, we've added 7 more. The proclamation gives the authority the right to add on additional service providers where the need is or a new service is identified. We've identified 7 more. So our directives, when you see them in a week or 2, will have 15, and we'll list the terms and conditions of how do you get your license, what does it mean, how do you qualify. Number 3 is, it kind of sets out, as it says, framework for licensing. How do you get a license, and then how do we supervise you, okay? So by the way, I failed to mention, with FSD support, we actually used PwC Nigeria helped us draft this directive. So we actually brought in experts to look at, we studied the market, we did a market survey, we probably reached out half the people here already, talked to people to understand what's on the ground, what can work in Ethiopia. So we used that, and then the expertise that PwC brought, including people from the regulatory arm of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So that's kind of the process we used to get here. This is pretty straightforward. This is what we use for all our regulatory activities. We can make, actually, we can issue directives. We do the licensing and service providers. We do internal monitoring and investigation to make sure our licensed service providers are actually complying with the directives and the proclamation. We do enforcement where there's a violation. And then we do surveillance. So we do random checks of the market to make sure that people are complying with the rules and regulations, right? These are the 8 original service providers as identified in the proclamation. So I'll limit it to that for now, just for today. The 7 more we can talk about if there are questions raised later on, but these 8 are what comes from the proclamation, okay? I'll go through them. I think I've tried to break them down along areas, categories on the next few slides. Okay, so there's securities trading, what Dr. Tolano was talking about. That happens through brokers. We currently have brokers on the ground. They're obviously not regulated, but they're brokers, okay? Brokers are the people between the exchange and the seller or buyer of shares or any kind of security, okay? Dealers are in the same line of brokers, but they just buy and sell for their own account. And then the third one might be, another thing maybe we added here is a broker-dealer. Broker-dealers do both functions. Okay. Second category, security issuance, investment advisory, pretty straightforward. Investment advisor, investment bank. Investment advisor could be somebody who can actually advise somebody like you and me, just individuals, or high-level expertise, okay? Investment bank, I'll come back to that. I'll come back. Let me go to the last few slides, and then I'll come back to that. Asset fund manager, collective investment scheme operator. Hannah talked about CIS earlier as a product. These are like just some of you, I'm sure, are aware of mutual funds. They'll fit in here. REIT products would fit in here. Things like that. So the operator would be a licensed entity within the authorities. So custodial services, here we have custodians. So I think Hannah mentioned earlier, no need to stress it, just custodian is somebody who will actually hold the securities on behalf of the investors. So a CIS operator would not have actually be holding the security or the money. A custodian would be doing that for a fee. So somebody like a bank, okay? So a large financial institution, banks currently are good custodians, right? They take your deposit, they segregate it based on your account, they pay you interest, they settle your taxes, and then give you a report on your account. So that's basically the design, except it's for securities. So we think banks, insurance companies, ideal candidates to be custodians. Credit rating agencies, obviously this will come as the market develops in the bond area. These are specialized service providers that not a lot of developing countries have internally. So for instance, if you look at Kenya, and our colleagues from FSD can correct me, I think the 5 largest credit rating agencies outside of the US, 5, are 2 or 3 from Nigeria, and then the other 2 from Mauritius. So there isn't a local credit rating agency. And because of it's highly specialized and the products, you need the kind of product development for it to work, right? Market makers are dealers basically who hold a share and then make liquidity happen in an exchange. So for instance, a market maker for Zaman Bank will have on its own account Zaman shares, and then if somebody who's a shareholder of Zaman wants to sell its share today, then we'll go to the market maker will make that happen, putting a little margin between what it's selling for and what it bought it from. So the margin between, that's how they make them money. Okay, so let me spend a bit of time on investment advice. Okay, investment bank. So in Ethiopia, outside of brokers, or maybe custodians, none of these service providers exist. So investment bank, I see some faces here. Some of you are doing financial advisory, and in that is listed investment banking services. And so it could mean a whole lot of sort of things. But generally, in the world, investment banks, the ones that are really big and successful, tend to be some kind of affiliated entities to retail banks. So currently, we have 30 or so retail banks. We imagine at least the top 5 of them can offer investment bank services. Unfortunately, the country's regulation doesn't allow, and by definition, if you look at the proclamation, our proclamation as well, it defines investment bank as a non-deposit taking entity. So, obviously our banks are deposit taking, so I see some bank folks here. So what we've been doing for the last 6 months is trying to work with the National Bank to make sure there is a system that allows our retail banks to adequately participate in the capital market service provider space. So I think we've come to an arrangement. So one of the things other countries do is do kind of a holding company structure. So there will be a holding company owned by shareholders, and then there will be the retail banking, investment banking, custodial services. So those are separate entities. So failure of one will not affect the other entities. So that's one way. Obviously, our holding company laws are very immature in the sense that they just came about from our revised commercial code. So the other suggestion was to use maybe a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary format to do some of these services. That allows protects the national bank's interest of making sure that depositors' monies are not at risk, basically. I mean, that's one of the big objectives of the national bank. So so we've come to an understanding. This is, obviously this is within the jurisdiction of the National Bank, and the National Bank is going to make a call on this. But our view is the participation of the retail banks in a lot of these service provider space is very critical to make sure that we have a viable capital market in Ethiopia. So appointed representatives are basically people who are appointed by each service provider, and their specialized expertise is what makes the service provider meet its licensing requirements. So a broker would need a trading officer who knows the trading rules of the exchange, for instance. So how do you acquire and maintain a service license? So there are 3 processes that we think of. There's a licensing, kind of post-licensing phase. And then if somebody wants to exit the market or is being forced to exit because they're not complying with the requirements, what does that look like? Licensing, so the applicant will submit evidence that it fulfills all the licensing requirements. We'll go through this in a bit later on. So kind of the 3 requirements, the 4 outlined, professional capacity, fit and proper requirements. Maybe we'll look at that in the next slide. There's a minimum capital requirement for each license. And then there is a requirement that each licensee has internal mechanisms that show that they're managing their risk and their organization is systematized, right? Okay. And obviously, once they fulfill that, they get their license, right? Okay. So one of the biggest thing that comes out of the proclamation is making sure that every service provider is fit and proper. So fit for purpose and proper for that, what he's trying to do. So we kind of looked at, if these are the 6 things that come out of the proclamation, gives you an idea, somebody who can meet these is fit and proper, okay? So we've kind of adapted these to make sure that people on the ground today can be fit and proper. So this is not, we're not using, you know, a Nigerian market model to define what our fit and proper is. This is based on, actually you'll see the directives and you will comment on them, but it's actually based on what can work in Ethiopia today. So if the license was to be issued next week, there should be people in this room who qualify, okay? That's the idea here. So competency, obviously we want them to have an idea that they know what they're doing. If he's a broker, he has to know the rules and the procedures of the exchange, has to know kind of the overarching directive requirements and what trading means in the formalized system as opposed to what is there today, which is a very informal kind of based on practice and what's been done before, right? Okay, competency, reputation, character, fairly straightforward. Somebody hasn't been convicted of fraud. Pretty straightforward. I think we don't want somebody like that as a service provider. Ability to work honestly and fairly. These are the kind of indicative things. Have they, you know, is there been prior misconduct related to previous license they took? Those kind of things. Financial status, the initial capital requirement, and ability to kind of have a business plan of a viable business. We obviously want service providers who are successful in what they're doing. This is a business. We want service providers coming to the business to be successful. It has to be a viable business. Otherwise, they're going to be forced into areas that we don't want, okay? Fraud, all these things come from failing businesses. Okay, they're trying to save their business, so they try, you know, they start touching on clients' funds. Financial status, they have not been liquidated, hasn't been, you know, the company hasn't been bankrupt before, there is in the history of bankruptcy. Reliability, okay, has this person been disqualified from other kind of organizations? Okay, for obviously, it has to be for cause. I mean, it has to be for cause, sure, right? Post-licensing, I'll go through this quickly. So we will have kind of annual renewal requirements and then reporting requirements. The reporting requirements, ongoing obligations, 4 areas, financial statements, there will be annual financial audited financial statement requirements, and then periodic financial requirements. What that is at 3 months or 6 months, we'll see once the board looks at the draft. Records, obviously we want service providers to maintain adequate and proper records of all interactions with their clients. One of the things that is traditionally included with all service provider regulations is reporting requirements on violations. So if anybody who works, so obviously I've talked about authorized reps, so those are licensed as well. So one of the obligations we put on reps and actually the licensed entity is to report on any violations they see internally or outside related to capital markets within a very short period of time. So that's, we've added that. Well, obviously the 4th is pretty straightforward. If you change your business address, your phone number, you should tell us. Exit, like I said, voluntary exit, what does it look like? It's just a systemized process of how do you exit, right? We want to make sure that your client's funds are protected. How do you transfer it to another company? That kind of procedure. Involuntary exit or revocation, obviously this is, you know, goes without saying. It's done through a fair hearing process. But if we are at a position where we have to take away your license, what does it look like? That's kind of the procedure that comes out. Supervision, so the second biggest function of the authorities is on supervision, right? So so these are the three areas we will be supervising. One is Prudential, just I talked about this earlier. So is it still a viable business? That's why we're looking at your finances every 3 months or 6 months or whatever. Does it look right? Are you viable? We don't want to find out that things have been happening for 6 months because you're having issues with your finances. So Prudential supervision, very important. Governance supervision, a lot of these service providers would be share companies and PLCs that have boards. So what does that board supervision look like? So that kind of framework. And then are they actually following their rules and procedures? The last one is the conduct of business, the supervision of how they're actually running the business. Okay, I'll look at it second, last slide. So code of conduct, first, professional competence. Are they actually doing the work like they're supposed to? Like a competent service provider. If you're a broker who's competent and you got your license, are you doing the things that you're supposed to do? Are you treating your clients fairly? Are you managing funds like you're supposed to, segregating funds of clients from your funds? Honesty and fairness, pretty straightforward. All the time they're gonna have to act with the best interest of the client. Independence is obviously talking about conflict of interest. How do you manage a conflict of interest? You're a broker dealer. Obviously you're trading for your own account. You're trading for your client's account. How are you doing that? I mean, a large order is coming in. So knowing that you're trading for your own account, what does that mean? Act with integrity. Obviously we supervise to make sure that there isn't dishonesty, fraud, deceit. That is in any of your acts. You're dealing with clients and the market. Yeah? Okay, thank you so much for listening to me.